Ladies and gentlemen, Hugo Toovey. Welcome to the show, Hugo. Welcome to Become Your Own Superhero. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thanks, Laban. Thanks very much for having me on the podcast.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Hugo. We were recently acquainted by another guest of the show, Nick Lee, and he thought you and I might get on quite well. And from the couple of conversations we've had prior to this, he's been pretty spot on. You're a fascinating individual who I would say has been fed a shit sandwich on occasion, but the way that you've handled it and come out the other side is inspirational to say the least. So why don't we just get straight into it, and why don't you tell us a little bit about who Hugo Toovey is?
Yeah, no worries, Laban. I'll try and give the condensed version without going into too much detail, because those will be here all day. But look, I'm a pretty normal guy from the outset, to be honest. I'm just I'm in the army. I'm an army officer. I've been in for about 10 years now. And as we were chatting about before, I'm currently working in that sort of health and wellbeing and welfare space, which, you know, as you'll find out in a second, it's very close to my heart with what I've been through on a personal level. But I'm currently living in Sydney, live with my lovely partner, Amber, who's a paediatric nurse. So she does nursing for her job. And then, she also has been looked after me over the past, which is, I'm very grateful for. And I suppose, into that, the last 7 years had a bit of a health journey. And it started when I was only 21. So I'm currently 28. And when I was 21, I was in my final 6 months of 4 years of officer training to become an officer in the Australian Army. And that's in Canberra. And it was June 2013. And I remember calling up my old man to wish him happy birthday. So it was June 18th. So that's why I know the date pretty well. And on a completely unrelated side note, I said, look, Dad, I've got this little lump on my right testicle. I've had it there for quite a while. And look, people ask me, how long do you think you had it there for? And looking back, I probably had it there upwards of 12 months, which, listening to that, you go, that's crazy. Why didn't you do anything about it? But you need to picture like a little frozen pea that you have in your freezer, right? Like a little frozen, painless pea that's just sitting on one of your testicles. It's not like the most invasive thing in the world. It's just there. Some days I felt like I couldn't even feel it. I knew it was there, but I think I was like a lot of young, naive 21-year-old blokes, with the whole she'll be right attitude. And I didn't think much of it. And I was honestly hoping it would go away by itself. But anyway, in the space of sort of 24 hours after an ultrasound, after seeing the doctor, I got told I had testicular cancer. And it had spread because I had put it off. That little pea-sized lump that I was putting off, and the painless didn't really affect my day-to-day life, and ended up being this little cancerous tumour that had spread upwards to all my abdominal lymph nodes. I was in for a pretty lengthy treatment and recovery from then on.
Gee whiz. And how long was the recovery process?
Yeah, look, it's typically, and this is, part of my messaging is for everyone listening to this, and for everyone, they should be aware of their body. You're normal. So if anything's, not normal and things change, then you've got to be proactive with it. And you got to, go to the doctor. And for me, if I went to the doctor in the first instance, I would have had surgery to remove my testicle, and that's it. A week or so recovery and on with the rest of your life. But unfortunately, I did have to do that, have my testicle removed. I got a fake nut in there as well, which
there's a special name for those, isn't there?
Well, I don't know. I just call mine my fake nut, to be honest. But
it
is pretty funny though, because it's funny. It's one of those things I look back on and I often say, and I laugh because I remember when I was with my urologist, and we we're actually going through the different selections of the fake nuts you can get, which was pretty hilarious. Like I was literally feeling some are more squishy, some are kind of silicone based, some are imported from overseas. And then I found it pretty funny when he actually said some blokes decide to get a bigger fake nut for whatever reason. I think it's an ego thing. And anyway, I just told him to match it up with the other guy, so I had a bit of symmetry.
Yeah.
which that's all I cared about. I was just a single 21-year-old bloke at the time. So I thought, well, if I'm in change rooms or whatever down the track. At least I can have a couple agates there, and it's a bit more normal. But yeah, so I had that surgery, but then unfortunately, because it had spread, I then had to have about 4 months of pretty intensive chemotherapy. I managed to graduate still, so I still graduated at no detriment to my health. And as soon as I graduated with the bloody sword and the parade and got the pips on my shoulders, literally 6 days later, I started intensive chemotherapy. And, you know, picture a classic chemo patient that you see in movies. That was me. As you know, all chemo affects people differently, and I had the bald head and the no eyebrows and the, you know, sick, skinny, frail, vomiting in the toilet. Like that's how I was. So that was pretty tough. I was only 22 at that stage. So, you know, when all your mates are out partying and living the life of a young bloke in their 20s, you know, I'm in hospital for a 1 week, couple of weeks off, and that went on for 4 months, and I was pretty crook. It really knocks you around, this particular chemo. It does smash you around. And unfortunately, that chemo didn't do its job in entirety. And there was still some precancerous signs in some of the lymph nodes. So I had to have what's called a retroperitoneal lymph node dissection, bit of a tongue twister there.
Gee whiz.
And it's a pretty uncommon surgery. And to put in perspective, the surgeon at the time in Adelaide who did this surgery had only done 2 years prior to that, and hadn't done one for 2 years. So it's not a common surgery, because usually chemo does the job for testicular cancer. So I had to have this surgery. It was an 8-hour operation, about a 30 centimeter incision down my stomach, and they literally open you up and put all your intestines, wrap it up in a like sleeping bag, and go to town and take out all your 60 or so, I think I had around 60 abdominal lymph nodes, and cut it through, and serious chance of complications and all sorts of stuff. But fortunately, I woke up and, you know, outside of a week in ICU and a few weeks in hospital, the surgeon did a remarkable job. So from there, it was just recovery. It was building up that abdominal strength and getting fit, and really looking towards my goal, which was to serve my country and go overseas on a deployment and do what I signed up to do, and you know, live a normal life, which I got there. And after a couple of years of hard work and perseverance and getting through the challenges that comes with it, I eventually got promoted to captain, which was an awesome achievement. But even more so, I got medically upgraded, which meant I was fit for deployment. You know, I was running my best 2.4K runs I had done. I was passing all the fitness assessments, and I was pretty fit and healthy. And then I got the 5-year clear scan, which was even better. So where are we now? 2018. I'm fit and healthy. I've just got given my 5-year clear scan. I remember cracking open a bottle of Verve with my partner, and just celebrating, like kind of saying, it's just almost great to feel normal. And you just felt like that cancer no longer defined who I was. But unfortunately, you know, that was pretty short lived. And in a space of 2 months, I found myself back into the doctor's rooms with completely unrelated complications. This time it was my bowel playing up a little bit of diarrhea, bit of cramping, just a bit of discomfort, and thought, you know, what's the go here? And I suppose 21-year-old naive Hugo, who put that little pea-sized lump off, at least I had learnt something. And as soon as it wasn't right, I said, nah, I'm going to the doctor here. And we ended up having a colonoscopy, which you're probably familiar with, a pretty simple day procedure. Camera up the bum, have a look around, you know, wake up, eat your little turkey sandwich, away you go. And it's all pretty standard, except this one wasn't so standard for me. And unfortunately, I got a call the next day from the receptionist saying, yep, mate, Terry Holt, the doctor, wants to see you to go through the results. And straight away, I had this sinking feeling, thinking, generally, that's not a good sign. And I remember going to the appointment with my partner, and we, you know, as soon as you see him, you see this somber look in his face, and you're like, fuck, that doesn't look good. And we sat down, and he turned his computer screen around, and he said, look, mate, sorry to say, we found a couple nasty polyps in there, and unfortunately, you know, you've got bowel cancer. And you're kind of sitting there like, what? I'm 26 for a start. I didn't think I could get bowel cancer. I've just been told I was clear from my testicular cancer, and you're telling me I've got a completely unrelated secondary cancer. So it was pretty emotionally quite a lot to take in, and then I had to, you know, go from there, you know, surgery and the like. But it was pretty difficult. And I often say this, one of the most difficult parts was, and if people listening have kids of their own, to actually call my parents, and I was living interstate, and calling my parents, and I didn't want to alarm them when I had the colonoscopy and stuff, because I just thought it was probably nothing. And I remember calling them, and, you know, Dad calls me Doog, and he goes, you know, "G'day Doogie, how's your day been?" And, you know, I tried to hold it, but then I just kind of burst into tears and just saying, like, I just got told I had bowel cancer. And you just hear the voice, like their voices. It's just so difficult as someone going through it. And it's actually interesting. It's just the timing we're doing this podcast on the 6th of August is exactly 2 years to the day, 6th of August, 2018, when I was told I had this, and I made this call to my parents exactly 2 years ago, which I think is almost quite eerie in a way, but it was a tough feeling. And it's something I often say to people, something like cancer doesn't affect just the individual, you know, it affects family and friends, and it affects everyone. So it's, it was a bloody difficult process. And I've literally spent the next 2 years from that point until today going through what I've gone through. And I've very recently, a couple of months ago, had my last surgery, and I'm cancer free. I'm missing I'm missing my whole large bowel, colon, rectum. I'm also missing all my abdominal lymph nodes. I'm missing my appendix. I'm missing one testicle. I'm missing part of my reproductive organs. But, you know, as I'm sitting here today, I'm cancer free, doing the best I've done in a long time. And it's pretty awesome feeling to say that. So hopefully that was a condensed version of it, Laban.
Well, I said, and I warned people at the start about the veritable shit sandwich, and I wasn't joking, Hugo.
Quite literally.
Mate, I got to say, you know, they might have taken away all of those physical attributes, but your spirit remains whole. And, you know, first things first, thank you for your service. And, you know, congratulations for, you know, having the fight to come through. I you know, as you tell that story, even though I knew, you know, what you were going to say, it's just like the boof with the second one. You know, bowel cancer, we had Stephanie Bansimer Brown on the show, who's a bowel cancer survivor. You know, she was in her 40s. She was considered really young. We had, you know, Nick Lee, whose wife passed away at 41, 42. You know, all these young people. And then here you are in your mid-20s. And it's just like, what the fuck's going on here? And I'm curious to know, like, from a hereditary point of view, like, you're obviously a fit guy who's been, you know, looking after himself as best he knows how. Do they know where this has come from?
It's actually interesting you say that, because very recently I've just had some genetic testing done. So genetic DNA testing with a cancer professor in Sydney. And we went to explore exactly that, to say, look, well, maybe there were some faulty genes. And I wanted to know that purely to see if I was more prone to what they group different cancers with. So if I was, it would have meant more prone to, say, prostate cancer. But more importantly to me, if I have kids one day, you know, so I don't pass those faulty genes onto them, and you can, through IVF and the like, take those out. And anyway, I didn't have any of that, which I was quite surprised about. And I was expecting maybe I did, because it's like you said, I've got no family history of cancer. And, you know, growing up, I've lived quite a healthy, generalized healthy lifestyle. There's nothing really that sort of said I should have got it. I did. So, you know, whether you call it bad luck or whatever, look, I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, like you just mentioned, a couple of people there just on this podcast who have been affected by bowel cancer. It is Australia's second biggest cancer killer. That's just the truth with it. In the latest research that's come out, actually, it kills more Australians aged 25 to 30 at the moment than any other cancer. And they're not sure why that is. There's links with maybe certain lifestyle, dietary type stuff that they still haven't worked that out. But the data shows now that it isn't just an old man's cancer that it's thought to be. So look, I've got pretty healthy genes according to the testing, but which is good. Means I won't pass it on to my kids if I have it one day. It's just, I call it a bit of bad luck, I suppose, Laban, that I found myself in that position.
Well, look, I think the way that you've gone about, you know, you've set up this foundation as well, this 25 Stay Alive, which you are the founder of, which we can talk about in a little bit more detail in a minute. The blessing of your experience is that now you're in a position to empower and help a whole truckload of other people that wouldn't ordinarily have had access to you had you not gone through that experience. And I think it's really important for people listening as well that cancer or any chronic illness isn't a life sentence. And when a lot of the other guests that we've had on the show as well, in the form of Professor Tim Noakes, Professor Peter Bruckner, Dr. Paul Mason, a lot of these amazing professionals who have doing a lot of work in this space, and people like Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who I might have mentioned it the other day to you, who's an American guy who's sort of like the world leader in cancer research, is that there seems to be a recurring theme that although there is certainly a genetic predisposition to getting stuff, you need a trigger. And so if, in your case, thankfully, there's no whatever, they haven't been able to, identify any defects in your DNA or whatever. But if we can get to the root of what the trigger might be, and whether that be lifestyle, stress, or diet, it's always one or three of those things, right? Then people can be a lot more empowered to take their health into their own hands. So it's not a death sentence. And in some cases, it can be a real blessing. And I'm sure you have your down days like anyone would. But in the conversation we've had, you've been bright, upbeat and really passionate to improve other people's lives. So, for that, we really thank you. And, you're doing great considering. So what's next for Hugo Toovey?
Well, yeah, no, I completely agree with what you're saying there, Laban, and I appreciate that. And it is a good point. And look, I'm fortunate that I'm still here, right? And look, I've unfortunately, through my foundation, 25 Stay Alive, and the online sort of community I have made friends all around the world online who have been affected by cancers. That's good and bad. When I say bad, it's because some of those people who are living with say, terminal cancer, and you're chatting one day and these inspirational people putting these posts up, and then a week later you see a post from their partner on their Instagram saying, unfortunately, so-and-so passed away last night, and it really does get to me, and you kind of realize, holy shit, like it takes people's lives. We're all living at the moment, living our lives, and there are people right now who are dying from these things outside of their control in many cases. But then it also makes me almost more passionate to realize, well, that's why I want to do what I'm doing. I want to share my story. I created 25 Stay Alive. That's the reason I'm doing it. So then not as many people die from these things. Because look, largely a lot of them are preventable. And that's the biggest one. And that's something that, you said where to now? Well, for me, it's continue to grow what I'm doing, continue to spread these important messages. And not just physical health and cancer. And you touched on the mental health thing. Look, I have had, yes, I'm a pretty positive, upbeat guy, but I have had some battles with my mental health, absolutely, over the years. And, I've been, diagnosed with depression, and I have had some very, very dark days. I've been in hospital. My worst was when I was in hospital for about 4 or 5 weeks, and I lost about 22 kilos, and I physically could not eat or drink for about 3 or 4 weeks because my stomach, it had been manhandled a few times with some emergency surgeries that the surgeon was concerned. He was concerned. He said, look, I haven't really seen this before, and it is a waiting game. There's not much more I can do. It's now up to the body. And so, of course, you're getting some dark days there. And that was my first real experience of proper, real depression, of that kind of dark place. Really cannot see myself getting out of it. And it's not a great feeling. And I think often people neglect that or forget about that mental health side of things. And that's what I did. I pushed that towards the side and thought that I always had to put on that brave smile. And truth be told, when my partner would come home or come visit me in hospital, I'd put on this brave face. How are you going? Yeah, I'm all right, blah, 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 blah. And there were sometimes as soon as she would leave and I was by myself, I'd burst into tears and I was really struggling. But I didn't talk to anyone about that because I felt that I was big enough burden as it was with my cancer that I had to be positive for everyone else. But that was at the detriment to my mental health. And anyway, I learned the importance of that over time and then really became an advocate for talking about our emotions, and for men especially, to be vulnerable and to realize that there's no shame in seeking help. And that's a massive one. I think that breaking that stigma to say, if you put your hand up to say, hey, Laban, mate, I'm fucking struggling at the moment and go seek some help. Go talk to a mate. Go reach out to the amazing services and support networks you can. And so that's something that I'm pretty passionate about too. So look, from now on, for me, it's just a matter of doing what I can to help the lives of others. And whether that's through my foundation, whether it's through the workshops I give, whether it's through coming on these amazing, inspirational podcasts like this one, I feel like as many platforms you can use to share these messages and these stories, it can be powerful, because as cliche as it sounds, and it's the best bit of advice I got from someone, and you hear it echoed a lot, but this was quite an influential person with quite a large sort of following. And he said, look, mate, if with whatever you do, no different to this podcast or presentations, or he said, it doesn't matter if you're giving a presentation in front of one person or, 10,000 people. He said, you got to look at it in the way that if one person is impacted by your story, or they actually make a positive change from what you're talked about or what you're saying, or you potentially even save their life, then even if it's one person, well, it's all worth it at the end of the day. Like you got to be grounded sometimes and think about that one person that you potentially could be saving their life. And I think that's every time I kind of reflect back on that and go, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is to hopefully save a life, and try to save as many lives as I can along the journey.
Mate, you're spot on. And here's something that I thought about probably at some point throughout this year, it might have been, is that it's now my responsibility to share a message of hope, having gone through my own journey, which was really different to yours, but at times, reaching those really horrendous lows, and having figured out a way to come out the other side of it. My duty is to share that with as many people as are willing to listen to it. And if you don't talk to someone because you're feeling horrendous, and then you go on and self-harm, or you do something drastic, it's fucking selfish, in my opinion. And I think suicide, I know it's a really controversial subject, but I think if you just go and kill yourself and you don't, and you haven't done anything about it, I think it's a really selfish act, because you're gone, but you leave behind a whole legacy of trauma, and you are affecting many, many people in a lot of cases through your inability to show some courage and reach out for help. And I know that might seem like a controversial statement, because mental health is a really, really complex subject, I'm sure. But, if I hadn't reached out for help, that's probably the direction that I would have ended up, because it's a spiral effect, and it's you spiral down or you spiral up if you start reaching out for help. So it might sound a bit polarizing, but do something about it, because it's your responsibility to get well and then be a contributing motherfucking member of society and inspire other people around you, rather than being a burden. And you'll be a burden if you don't do something about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one, and I definitely I see where you're going. I see and I respect your views with that, and but my views with it though, I think, and I completely agree though with the whole seeking help component. I think if you recognize you're struggling, and people who are suicidal or living with a mental illness, generally they know that they have that, or living with that, or they are having those feelings. And you're right. It is up to them to actually want help. They need to seek that help, and that's the first step. That being said, there are people who seek that help, and it's not always just a click of a finger that they're going to be better. It can be a very complex beast, and a lot of people have been affected through suicide. I lost one of my best mates, second year army training. He tragically ended his own life, and he was seeking help. He was seeing psychologists. I got him with a failed attempt at one stage. I was there to help him. People were there to support him, and he still eventually ended his own life, which was tragic. And, you then have the whole regrets about, I could have done more. But I don't actually look at someone like in that situation as being selfish. Yes, he's left behind some serious pain with his mum, who I regularly catch up with, Maria, a lovely lady. And, yes, pain with his friends, and yes, he has left that pain. But by saying that, I often think I've never been suicidal myself. Yes, I've been depressed, but there is a big difference between being depressed and being suicidal, and you don't have to be depressed to be suicidal. I haven't been suicidal, but to understand if a person gets to that point, gets to that pain that they have, to know that they're probably going to cause this pain, they get to that point where to them, it is the only way out. I think until you're in that situation, it's almost hard to understand. Like, they almost don't have rationale thinking because they're in such a fucked up way that's their only way out. You think about going, well, fuck, how much pain would they have to be in? And I liken it to, and I can't take credit to this sort of analogy, but someone told me this, and it was a very sort of confronting way of comparing it. They said, well, picture you've just gone on a marathon. You've gone on an ultra marathon. That's obviously like you like doing Laban, and you're in the bushes somewhere, and there's a massive fire. And you're just like, you're stuck. You're stuck in a fire. All of a sudden, there's no way out. You're literally stuck in this fire, 360 degrees. You're like, fuck me, I can't get out of this. And you try, and initially you try and get ways you can get out. You try to get on your phone. So you've tried a few things initially. It's still not working. You're like, fuck me, this is going to, and all of a sudden the fire gets closer, and you start physically burning alive. And you would be in so much excruciating pain. You've tried to get out of that fire, but you're like, fuck, I can't get out of it anymore. You're in so much fucking pain. You're literally burning alive. At that point, when you are burning alive and you're in so much pain, I think a lot of people then and there will just want to say, fuck, I just want to end this right now. This is too fucking painful. They don't think in that moment necessarily about, oh, what's it going to do to my family if I let this fire kill me? What's it going to do? And someone in very senior up in that mental health space who's had a lot to do with mental health, he likened it to something like that and said, that can be what it's like to people who are, not everyone, but people who are suicidal, and they're going through that deep mental pain of it is their only way out. They don't think rationally. That's what they want to do to get out of it. So I look at that and go, I can see how now it's not always selfish. It's not always selfish. When people are doing that, I feel fucking sorry for people in that situation. So I don't know. That's just my thoughts on it. But absolutely agree with you about the seeking help component. But then it's such a sad thing when someone gets to that stage, because I'm sure if you backtracked it and before they were suicidal, they wouldn't want to. They wouldn't want to leave their kids or family or friends and stuff with that. But when they then get to that stage of just before the incident, for example, they're almost a different person, and they're in that much fucking pain that's their way out. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts with it. I think it's such, like you said, it is a complex beast. And I think until you are in that, until you've been there and you've been suicidal and you've actually had, God forbid, a fucking suicide attempt, I think it's hard to actually really truly understand it.
Yeah, I'll cop that. I will. And I, sorry about your mate. And I did he leave any note or anything behind to help explain what was going on?
He did. And once again, I feel like this podcast has come at a very interesting timing, but his anniversary was a couple of weeks ago. And I actually, every anniversary I've got a note. He left a few, and I actually, I did reflect on that note, and it's always very emotional to read something like that. He was only 22. And very early on in that note, he says, he talks about it's none of your fault type of thing. He wanted to make that clear, don't blame yourself. And it's quite a very well written. He was a very intelligent guy, very thought out note. And he doesn't really explain why. He just talks about he never thought he would get to this stage, but he has. And he, life is beautiful and this, that, and the other. It was quite this very spiritual type, this note. And it was remarkable, but basically very early on, he's basically saying that this is what it's come to for him. He never thought he would be in this position. And he loves everyone dearly, those close to him. And he left these, when he did it, which is pretty emotional. And to think that guy's 22, and he's written this such a thought out would have probably taken him, which always gets to me. It probably took him, weeks to just write that, which means that he was kind of just tweaking it, and there was no grammatical errors in it. It was just this perfectly written note, and you think, fuck, like, imagine wouldn't know what it's like to start sitting there now and just typing away. And that's, I'm happy with that end product. And he had them all on his bed, and then it was all carried out the way he did it. And it's just kind of like, it's very eerie, and it's, pretty full on. But once again, I don't understand. I can never understand what he would have been going through that, I suppose.
Well, look, I think, and I'm sure him leaving the notes behind made it easier rather than if you just done it and just left nothing behind, because at least there's an explanation. You're being admonished of any responsibility, because there'd be a bit of guilt, survivor guilt they talk about. And I suppose I use the language like it's selfish, so that anyone listening that maybe dabbles with the idea of it, that's not truly in that dark place, just snaps into fucking gear and goes, actually, you know what? Like, I need to do something about this now, right? So that's probably the audience I'm targeting. Something I've thought about with suicide for a long time, because there's a lot of people that I know that I have thought were great candidates to take their own lives, given what they'd gone through, and don't. Thankfully, I haven't been exposed directly to too many people that have taken their own lives, but I know plenty of people that do know people. And like your fathers, mothers with family and kids, everything on paper to live for. And I just wonder if it's some kind of inbuilt thing that human beings have evolved. It's like cutting off the evolutionary chain at that point. Like there's some defect, and I don't want to use the word defect, but there's something inherently troubled or whatever that's not going to make great breeding when you break it down from an evolutionary point of view. And I just wonder if it's like a turn off switch, and it's like, okay, right. Do you know what I mean? So, and that might explain how rational these people are thinking. They're in such a horrendous place in their own mind. Whereas if you look at your mate, what he had going for him at 22, wouldn't have taken much to get him into a place where he was flourishing. And so it's really complex, man. And we could talk about this stuff for a long time, I'm sure. But like we say, anyone listening to this, like if you are starting to have those doomy thoughts, fucking do something about it. Something about it.
Spot on, Laban. And that is, one bit of advice I would have from that, and to kind of, to finish on that in a way, is exactly that. It's, if you are happening to listen to this and you are in that dark place that we've kind of spoken about, and this is one thing that, if I do have one regret, and I try not to have that regret, because you can't, it will just eat you up, but it would be to know what I know now, because shit, I knew nothing back then at 20 years of age. But if I knew what I knew now, to sit down with Pete and just talk to him about that and go, mate, I know you can't see it now. It's impossible to see it now, but promise me, I'm not making this up. Promise me. So I promise you that it will get better. And that's the biggest bit of advice that I have, is that it will get better. And you speak to people who have, had attempts, for example, and they've gone on, they've had families, and they're now these, people that are loving life and living life. They're the first to say it. They can't see it at the time, but it will get better. So if you're listening to that, just know it's hard to see, but I promise you, and I wouldn't make these promises without, believing in it, that it will get better. So,
yeah. And your experience, Hugo, like you could have easily just taken the easy way out and thrown yourself in front of the number 6 tram or whatever it was after getting that second diagnosis. And I suppose rather than focusing on some of the not so fun stuff, what are some of the blessings that have come into your life as a result of these experiences?
Spot on, Laban. And exactly, I don't like my story to be too sort of depressing, because naturally there's going to have parts of that. But I also like to think it does have a bit of a positive side to it, and it does have a feel good side to it, which is important to acknowledge. And the first one, I wouldn't have met my partner, for example, if it wasn't for getting my first lot of cancer. So there's one. We've been together for 6 years now, and that's something as small as that, whereby I was never meant to go back to Adelaide. But because of my testicular cancer, I went back to Adelaide, underwent all my chemotherapy, all my treatment. And then I ended up living there for a few years whilst I was recovering. And then during that recovery process, I met Amber. So we've been together ever since. So if you believe in those types of things, well, there's one positive, which is a pretty big positive, that if I'd never got that, well, I would have probably never been back to Adelaide, and I very highly doubt we would have met. So there's one massive positive, and she's been by my side every step of the way. And for this second lot of cancer and my whole journey, she's always been that one who's been my sounding board and sort of been that pillar of strength to motivate me to get through it. So I feel like it's, absolutely has been a massive, massive help and a massive silver lining, I suppose. And the other massive thing is, it's interesting. No one chooses this path. No one sort of one day at 18, when they're their career guidance counselor at year 12, what do you want to do when you grow up? I want to go through a couple bouts of cancer, or, or go through massive adversity, so then I can get through it and then end up being sort of, a positive motivational type speaker. Like no one sets out to do that, because, it's just one of those things that it just happens. But I feel like I've almost been given a unique opportunity as a result of this, where it's like, yep, I've got it. It sucks. Yep, we've spoken about all the shit sides of it. But then now I'm in this position to go, hey, I can either do the whole why me card, this sucks, and, the whole victim mentality. And yep, I've had days like that. Or I can go, fuck me, I've been given this unique, powerful opportunity to go, I can use what I've gone through and what I've learnt through lived experience. And that's massive. Like, lived experience is huge. What I've gone through to go, hey, how powerful would that be to use that and then help other people who might be either going through something similar or, before they get to that stage, or even just people listening to go, fuck me, life's pretty precious, and walk outside and look up at the sun and just appreciate the small things in life. And I think that's, as soon as I identified that, it almost just clicked. I'm like, fuck, that's pretty powerful and pretty positive. And to me, that's the biggest positive. And someone even asked me recently, would I ever take back what I've gone through, if you could get in the DeLorean and drive back bloody, 5 years and change that. And my answer was no, because I wouldn't be the person I am today going through that. And I don't even mean that to sound cliche. It's the truth. I've learned so much about myself, and I'm such a different person, and I've been forced to learn about myself, but I think that's a massive positive. And now I love what I'm doing now. I love, speaking to you on on a podcast like this, or sharing my story on a webinar, or giving a face-to-face presentation, or even just talking to a random dude from a different part of the world on Instagram who's got a question about what it was like living with a stoma, and you're just chatting to him and you feel like, how cool is that? So yeah, I think that pretty well answers that question about, well, no, I wouldn't take it back. And I think, my future from now to however long I've got on this world, I've almost found that why, and I've found my purpose, which I'm grateful for, because I think people spend most of their lives trying to find that purpose and, why they wake up in the morning. And, you sound very similar, Laban. You wake up in the morning and you look at your calendar and you're excited with some meetings you've got, and you're excited with who you're going to talk to. And, you get excitement out of all this stuff. And I'm very similar, which I think is awesome, because there are a lot of people out there who probably don't have that same sort of purpose. So yeah, that's hopefully answers that, because I think it's, that's where I am now.
Mate, it's a great attitude. And you're right. It's, the blessings that come about through adversity, and this is part of my own mission statement that I came up with as well. I think it says, through the blessing of adversity, I'm now in a position where I know what my purpose on this planet is. And that understanding what your why is something that most people don't figure out before they die. And you've figured it out early on. I only figured mine out in the last 18 months. And like the fulfillment factor that you get out of figuring this out, right? Whether it usually doesn't pay a lot early on, but when you are passionate and driven and loving what you do, it doesn't feel like work anymore. And the benefit for me, right, from a selfish point of view, I don't think it's really selfish, but like I have been around people like you for doing this podcast, and I have learned amazing stuff that I would have never picked up had I not put myself in this situation. And because of that new, found information, I'm able to pass it on to the next generation of people that want to hear and listen. And if we had, more people on the planet doing that more often, the world would be a really different place.
Mm.
Knowledge is power, and it really, really is. And like my interests are very diverse and wide, and the guests have been very diverse and wide. And, you coming on and sharing your story is just wonderful. Like you reinvigorate me just to snap back into gear when you have those moments of, when you have a lull or whatever, and you fired me up to get excited about the other stuff I'm going to do. And one of the things that you are about to embark upon is something that's very exciting and a very close topic to this one in terms of the podcast, behind the uniform. What's that all about?
Yeah, look, it is. It's kind of, it is a similar-ish concept to obviously like becoming your own superhero. Obviously, I see that cape in the background, which is great. But but you're right. So behind the uniform, we've touched a bit on that. It's the premise is basically, initially we're speaking to some athletes, right? So they wear a uniform as their day-to-day profession. They put on their uniform, whether it's a cricket outfit or a footy jumper, that's their uniform that people identify them in that. And the concept is that a lot goes on behind the uniform that to the naked eye, people probably don't get. And I can relate to that my full-time job, I'm in the army and I put on my army uniform, and you walk down the road and people look at you and they will naturally have a perception of who you are in your army uniform. But I guarantee you they wouldn't know what's actually behind that uniform and what I've gone through and the struggles that I've had and who I am as a person, So I feel like it doesn't necessarily represent who you are. And that's exactly what we're trying to uncover is we're getting these guests on the show who are, they're expressing their emotions, they're being vulnerable, they're talking about their mental health experiences. And it's really uncovering that so people realize that, it's okay to not only talk about that, but it's actually empowering to talk about that stuff. And the old mentality of what a man is, that he can't cry or he can't share his feelings, and it's all bullshit, right? It's all bullshit. It's a man should absolutely be able to share their emotions and express how they're feeling, and it's no different to if you're a CEO of a company and your uniform, you put on your tie and your suit every day and you get to work and people perceive you as that successful CEO type of guy. But a lot of research comes out that a lot of top CEOs actually really struggle with their mental health. And I think that's a big part of it because they almost live this perception of what people perceive them as and what they need to be. And they don't feel like they're in a position to actually be vulnerable and to share their emotions and to put their hand up to say, hey, look, I am struggling a bit, but that's okay because there's so much help out there. And if I get that help, well, guess what? I'll be even better than I am now. It's not a death sentence if you go seek help. Or, back in the day, I felt like if you saw a psychologist, it's kind of like, oh shit, mate, are you all right? Like, is everything okay? Like they think that, you need to go on the bloody loony bin. But
yeah,
why is it that a group of mates can, go to the pub and have a few beers and, where were you, Bob? I just came back from the old physio, I'm a bit tight in the old back. Oh no, people don't think twice, right? But if, well, where were you, mate? You're a bit late to the pub. I just, saw my psychologist. People still might naturally be like, oh, fuck, is he all right? It's like, well, no, that's fine. Like it should be part of everyday conversation. It should be normalized. And it's actually fascinating. My psychologist, who I see every second week or every month, and I'm actually doing really well at the moment. And she actually said, oh, do you still want to see me? I said, yeah, absolutely. Because I'm in a great place and I want to explore that more and why I'm in a good place. And I want to keep being in a good place. And I love speaking to you and I love every session that I have with you. And it's, I go to the gym and see my PT to get fit. Well, why can't I see a psychologist to keep my brain healthy too? And to talk about how I'm feeling. And so I think it's slowly changing. Still think there's some work to be done. So behind the uniform, we're setting out to try and just to get these pretty, influential people who, once they take that uniform off, they're just like you and me. They're these guys who have a family, or they have their struggles as well. And it's just their avenue of just being vulnerable and talking about these important conversations at the end of the day.
Are you able to divulge any of your super duper guests coming up, or is it all hush hush?
No, not at all. Look, we have locked in a few great guests so far. You know, we've got Moses Enriquez, he's been very open with his. He won the BBL for the Sydney Sixers, and he's an all rounder. Played cricket for Australia. Great guy, and he's recently been open about his mental health, basically saying how people would look at him on TV or on his Instagram page and see this, you know, successful guy who's happy with this young kid and you know, baby Archie and his wife. And it's such a, wow, look at his life. It's the pinnacle and the best life. And he put this post up recently saying, it's not all what you see. He said, behind those smiles on my post, I've actually been struggling. And he even went on to say, there's been some days after a cricket win, he said he's cried more than his baby Archie, and he's been in such a dark place and he's struggled so much. And he said, you know, he just wanted to open up about it and talk about it so that people who aren't a famous cricketer know that, you know, they might not be living the life you think they are. Everyone can struggle. And so I just think it was very powerful. So someone like Moses Enriquez, you know, we're also talking to Casey Conway. He used to play NRL, and he's a gay Indigenous man, a proud Indigenous man, and he never came out when he was playing footy, and that's something we're keen to explore. And he's went through some mental health stuff as well that he felt that he couldn't, and he's now an awesome guy who's been through some battles as well. And these are guys who I suppose they've been through it, and now they're in a really positive light. So it's kind of, you know, a bit inspiring. And
I didn't mean for that laugh to sound condescending. I just don't think I've ever heard the phrase gay Indigenous man in the same sentence. Isn't that great?
I know. It is good. And that's why we love it. It's kind of like, well, even that in itself is awesome to kind of, here's this proud guy who's proud of his heritage, you know, proud to be gay. And, you know, I'm completely all for that. So, you know, my best mate, I just spoke about it, unfortunately ended his own life. You know, he was gay, and I think that was probably one of the big issues he had back then. So I think it's fantastic now that even something like that's changed drastically in the last few years, let alone 10 years. So, so people like that who have just got this, just this story behind them, but ultimately behind all the uniform, behind it all, they're just everyday guys. And they're the type of people that we're really keen to chat to. And there are so many awesome, inspiring people out there. So we're pretty excited to get into it, and hopefully, you know, we can, you know, educate and inspire people along the way.
That's awesome. Have you got any idea time frame how people can listen to it? Are you going to record it on Zoom?
Well, depending obviously when this episode's going to be released, and to put it in sort of time perspective on, when you know, hopefully when this is released, who knows, we could have episodes out there already, but we are going to be recording soon, and hopefully we can do the Sydney guest. I'm living in Sydney, so you know, I can still see people and leave my house, unlike Victoria, which is obviously a lot more difficult. So it'll be a mixture of in-person interviews, you know, in person at a studio, and also like we're doing now, Laban, you know, with the power of technology and Zoom, which is also fantastic. So, which I think is awesome. You can speak to someone in their living room, but so it'll be a mixture. And hopefully when this is released, who knows, we might be well on our way with episodes out there, but, you know, behind the uniform, and we'll be on Spotify, iTunes, all the main little podcast apps that you listen to this podcast on. You know, I don't want to take away from Become Your Own Superhero, but I'm sure you can listen to two podcasts, Become Your Own Superhero and Behind the Uniform.
Well, like the great comedian said, whose name has totally escaped me. He said, "Be so good, they can't ignore you." Steve Martin, it was. Sorry, be so good, they can't ignore you. And that's the sort of the philosophy. And it's never about trying to take one audience away from another when it comes to this stuff. It's so important. And it's like, I don't know what your thoughts on this, Hugo, are. Like, because we're sort of ensconced in this whole arena a lot, we take for granted, I think, the fact that it's not actually as widespread as what we might think it is at times. You know, like you go across two suburbs and it's like, the blokes. Don't talk about the weaknesses, all the stuff you're talking about at the pub.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. It's, it's one, it is interesting. I think there is a bit of a shift. I think it is changing. I think there's a long way to go though. But having this avenue like podcasting, or social media, it's pretty massive. Like you've got this opportunity to connect with people from all around, not only Australia, but all around the world. And I think that's pretty powerful, especially during, the whole COVID times of, unfortunately, I can't see overseas travel happening for a long time, for example. Regional travel, it's still, restrictions in place for that. But to be able to connect with people through telling a story through a podcast, I think is pretty powerful. Because people listening to this episode right now, whenever this is released, they've taken that 1 hour or however long this will be to put time aside to listen to it and to share this conversation, to share this journey, and to be a part of it, which I think is powerful, very powerful. Whether they're driving to work or going for a run or lying in bed, it's just an awesome thing to connect with people without even knowing you're connecting with them. I think is really cool.
Yeah, spot on. And how can we find you, Hugo?
So look, it's I'm pretty open guy, as you know. I do share some stuff on social media. So look, Hugo Toovey on Instagram, I share a lot, and also 25 Stay Alive is my other little proud little project that a bit of a foundation I started.
That's the number 25 too.
Yeah, 25 Stay Alive, and I guess the concept behind that is, as you've heard over the last little bit, I've gone through a lot at a pretty young age, in my 20s. And I think when I first shared my story, I realized that, yes, I'm unique going through, say, 2 bouts of different cancers and stuff like that. But there are so many people out there in their 20s, 30s, 40s who have gone through, whether it's bowel cancer, whether it's, depression, whether it's, suicidal ideations, whether it's breast cancer, it doesn't matter. There's just so many different things and ways that people are impacted by these illnesses. And it really got to me when, I kept seeing like the campaign on the ad, for example, for bowel cancer. It'd all be about, when you turn 50, you get this screening kit in the mail. And I think that's fantastic because, yes, there's a lot of data suggests that you are increased chance to do that. And yep, if you're listening to this and you're over 50 and you haven't taken your bowel cancer screening kit and it's sitting in your cupboard, well, go take it. I think that's absolutely important. But what got to me is that there was no real campaigning or messaging out there for younger people, like your typical young adult. I feel like it seemed to be, you'd be kids, children, which obviously, it's very devastating when they get impacted by things like cancer, but then also older people. But then the amount of times I got when I tell people that I had cancer, every time it would be but you're so young. You're so young. You're so young every time. And it's like, well, actually, bowel cancer now kills more people from 25 to 30 than any other cancer. Testicular cancer is a young man's cancer, but it wouldn't matter. Every time would be you're so young, you're so young. So I think that the messaging there was why I started 25 Stay Alive, was to say you shouldn't be 50 until you start taking your health seriously and you start going after the doctor and you start taking these tests. You should be in that mindset from 25. And that kind of, more or less, that number 25 Stay Alive, look, it is catchy at 25 Stay Alive. It rolls off your tongue, but it more or less encompasses or symbolizes a typical young adult. So it doesn't matter if you're in your teens, 20s, 30s, it kind of symbolizes that sort of young adult.
The quarter life crisis.
Well, it is. And I thought, but then even more so, I've still got this vision and this grand old plan to say that, I've just been talking about when you turn 50, you get sent this stuff. Well, when you turn 18, well, you're an adult, a legal adult. When you turn 21, that's obviously still, when people that's their next sort of stage or the next milestone. And I think from 21, it seems to be like 30, 40, 50, 60. They're kind of the milestones. And I thought, how powerful would it be that when you turn 25, I feel like that's kind of your halfway to 30. You're no longer, in your early 20s anymore. I feel like that's when you kind of think, actually, I'm probably a bit more mature now. I need to start, being a bit more serious with my life and my health and all sorts of stuff, right? So I thought, well, if you're 25, imagine getting something in the mail, no different to when you turn 50, but it is let's say I live in Bondi Junction. It's sorry, I've just got a phone going off in the background there. Sorry about that. Let's say when you turn 25 and you get something in the mail, it's a list of the GPs in your area. Because a lot of 25-year-old blokes or women in their 20s might not even have a GP. And I think it's so important to build up a good relationship with your GP. So something like that, but even more so, imagine having a complete blood count. I know you're a big one in, what your blood levels and you're looking after your health and tracking things. So imagine having a classic CBC, complete blood count or full blood count, where you can take off to your GP, and it's no different to when you turn 50, you get these tests and stuff to just to get in that mindset to just get a complete bloods done to say your iron levels are low or your magnesium level, you've got actually some high inflammation. Let's explore that further. But just to almost be that trigger, the first step to get into that. So I thought, imagine like that's a goal, 25 stay alive down the track, through government initiatives and all that, to say, I'd love that. So you get a 25 stay alive letter in the mail and it's all about, going off to your GP, getting your bloods done. Anyway, so that's kind of a long-term vision, but for now it's just basically creating a bit of a foundation and platform to get people aware that they're not invincible is the more or less ultimate message there.
Well, mate, I don't think it's that ambitious, because we had Dr. James Mukey on the show, the eye surgeon from another Adelaide boy, who shared with us some amazing statistics and some predictions that we'll spend 100% of Australia's GDP on type 2 diabetes. So preventative medicine is going to have to be of paramount importance, because the prevention is better than the cure by a long shot. So I think you'd probably be surprised about how quickly you can get the ball rolling on this, young Hugo. And
no, it's interesting. So I just want to literally jump in there because it's interesting you say that. One of my brigadiers at work had something very similar. It's quite a powerful thing. He said, we should be focusing on the prevention of thousands, rather than the crisis of hundreds. Mm-hmm. And it's a really true statement to say that quite often I get it, it's important, but we put so much resources and, into the crisis of people who are at that far right end. But, we should really be putting so much investment and resources into the preventative side of things. So completely agree with that.
And if you're a greenie and you're worried about carbon emissions, 10% of the carbon emissions globally come from the medical industry. So if you're sick, you're affecting the greenhouse effect. So do your part. There you go. Hugo, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing your amazing story with us. For anyone that's interested in reaching out, you can find Hugo on his Instagram and jump on there, 25 Stay Alive. Ladies and gentlemen, Hugo Toovey.
Thanks, Laban. Thanks very much for having me. And just to finish off on a quote, which I quite like, and I think it definitely sort of touches on what we've been speaking about, especially in that mental health space. But staying positive doesn't mean you have to be happy all the time. It means that even on hard days, you know that there are better ones coming. So I think that's a nice little sort of segue to close out the episode for people listening, is that, there's always going to be some better days coming if you happen to be sort of going through a bit of a rough patch at the moment. But Laban, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Amen. We'll finish on that.